Now, let's catch up with Labor MP Joel Fitzgibbon. I want to talk to him about energy policy. Good to talk to you again, Joel. But just on this, first up, I know it's particularly popular for politicians, whether they're state premiers throwing up hard borders or now the Prime Minister and others stressing the impervious nature of our international borders. But surely if you're an Australian in India and you have a passport, you have a right to come home.
You do, Chris, and you'd be coming home if the federal government had moved earlier on quarantine. It's its responsibility. You know, these mining companies can put up a mining camp virtually overnight, but the Prime Minister, for whatever reason, has refused to engage, to take on that responsibility to build the remote facilities.
Oh, come on, just let me interrupt you for a moment, Joel. You live in New South Wales, and you know that New South Wales has processed about 2/3 of all the returning Australians in hotel quarantine. It's been managed well. There's always been the risk of some cross-infections. They've happened. They've been contained. There's been no citywide lockdowns. It can be done. It's just these state Labor premiers are trying to blame someone else.
I still think, Chris, that hotel quarantine in our capital cities, in confined areas, it was always going to be problematic. And full marks to New South Wales for doing it pretty much without incident. Others have had problems, and I think we're too harsh in calling them out. It doesn't change the fact that even, it doesn't matter how well Gladys has done, Chris, we haven't been able to bring enough home. And we haven't been able to bring enough home because the Commonwealth hasn't been prepared to play a role. And now it will be playing catch up, Chris.
We hear that argument a bit, but they stopped because Victoria stopped bringing people home because they stuffed up hotel quarantine, and the other states are putting restrictions on. They're locking down cities when they get one infection or two infections. We've just got to be a little bit more willing to take on the risks and management here. But anyway, I take on your point of view there, but I do want to make sure we get your thoughts on energy. The government announcing some of the proposals it's brought forward, the federal government, to try and ensure we've got some reliability of supply into the future. And they're still looking at possibly funding by government through the Snowy Hydro scheme a gas-fired electricity generation in your area, in the Hunter. Do you think that is A, welcome, and B, necessary?
Let me get the measured criticism out of the way first, Chris, before I somewhat back what the government's trying to do. What Scott Morrison did today is to miss his own imposed deadline. Remember, he thumped his chest and said, if the private sector doesn't do something on firming power by the end of April, I will move. He didn't move today. Instead, Angus Taylor made an announcement, which wasn't really an announcement at all. It was a promise to do something in the future with respect to the options paper delivered by the Energy Security Board. Having said all of that, I'm still very, very hopeful that Snowy Hydro will move forward with its gas peaking plant in Kurri Kurri in the Hunter Valley. And I hold some hope still that AGL will also build a gas peaking station in Tomago in the Hunter Valley. As a general principle, what Angus Taylor said today is correct. We do probably need to move from an energy-only market mechanism to a mixed mechanism where the big generators, those who give us the reliability, the reliable power, are, if you like, compensated or paid a premium for their capacity to do so. What's happening is that all those renewables are coming in. They have zero marginal cost. They are subsidised. They're driving the price down and pushing coal-fired generators out of the market early. And if you do that, Chris, of course, you're going to lose that reliability. So we're trying to do three things here. We're trying to keep prices down. We're trying to maintain and improve reliability. And we're trying to reduce carbon pollution. It's a very difficult balancing act. There are three strings there, and if you pull one too hard, the whole house comes down.
Yeah, it's very complicated, but essentially what's happening is the subsidies that have been flowing to get renewables into the system, well, some of that has to come back as a subsidy to guarantee reliability of supply through gas or coal or other forms of energy. Now, to do this, that kind of makes sense. It's all complicated, as you say. But in the end, it'll never stick unless there's political bipartisanship in this area. Are we getting any closer to that?
I hope so. I think the so-called climate wars have calmed down in recent months, Chris. That is a good thing. We still have policy competition. Like in New South Wales, you have the New South Wales government doing things that will accelerate the uptake of renewables and make it more difficult for our coal-fired generators and make it more difficult for people to invest in new gas-fired generators. And at the Commonwealth level, Angus Taylor suggesting today he might be doing the opposite. So the Commonwealth really needs to sit down with the states again. And so it's great to have bipartisanship amongst politicians generally, but we need the decision makers at the table to have policy direction or pulling in the right direction. It is madness, Chris, given we're going to have a reliability gap. We can't get more renewables into the system if we don't do more on retaining existing coal generators or get more firming power into the system through new investment, whether it be hydro, gas, or battery storage. It's like junking the car when it's still, at 100,000 kilometres, Chris, when it's still good to go. We need to realign the physical life of our coal generators with their economic lives. We shouldn't be closing them early. Something like 90% of the generation capacity in New South Wales is 30 years old or older. So they're going to reach the end of their physical lives in the not too distant future. The last one in Queensland will close in 2050 on current schedules. But if we put policies in place that closes them ahead of their physical lives, in other words, you bring the end of their economic lives sooner than their physical life, then you're going to have this big gap in firming capacity, and that's going to send what's going to produce unreliability, and it's going to send prices up.
Spot on, Joel Fitzgibbon. Thanks for joining us.
A pleasure, Chris.
Joel Fitzgibbon there, the Labor member for the Hunter region. I told you, he's a very sensible Labor MP, is Joel, when it comes to this issue in particular of energy reliability.